Hello Zimbabwe and welcome to Livetalk Diaspora Forum. We are coming to you live from Studio 7 at the Voice of America in Washington. Today on Live Talk, we are looking at the SADC anti-sanctions marches held across the country with thousands of civil servants marching in Harare, demonstrating against the so-called sanctions the government says were imposed against Zimbabwe by the United States of America and other Western nations. But first, let's take a look at the war in the Middle East between Israel and Hamas. The American government has labeled Hamas a terrorist group. As tensions in the Middle East escalate following the Hamas terror attack on Israel and Israel's subsequent bombing of Hamas targets in Gaza, the future of Iran's nuclear program remains unresolved. As Henry Ridgewell reports, the West sees Tehran as the major backer of Hamas, and the group's attack on Israel has set back efforts to de-escalate tensions with Iran.
Western leaders see Iran as the major supporter of Hamas militants, but have not accused Tehran of direct involvement in the group's October 7th cross-border attack on Israel. Prior to the attack, relations between the West and Iran had been cautiously improving. In September, the United States struck a prisoner swap deal with Tehran and released $6 billion of frozen Iranian assets. That money has since been refrozen.
There was room for direct negotiations towards the end of October between Iran and the US in Oman. But that, I think, is now completely off the books, and there is probably no political space left for direct engagement between the two countries.
Talks in Vienna to revive the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA, stalled last year, though neither side has said it is officially finished. The United States pulled out of the JCPOA in 2018, and Iran stopped complying with its commitments soon after. The UN's nuclear watchdog, the International Atomic Energy Agency, said in its August report that Iran was continuing to enrich uranium up to 60% purity, short of 90% weapons-grade fuel. Iran has removed IAEA monitoring equipment and has blocked some inspectors from visiting the country.
As part of the de-escalatory understanding between Iran and the US, Iran stopped accumulating additional 60% enriched uranium. Well, that might now change given the rising tensions between the two sides. It would take Iran less than a week to enrich enough uranium for a single nuclear weapon. And that's why this is literally a ticking bomb, and there needs to be a solution one way or another to curb Iran's nuclear activities.
IAEA Chief Rafael Grossi said he saw no correlation between the Israel-Hamas war and Iran's nuclear program.
There's still no evidence that Iran is contemplating a move away from compliance with its essential nuclear non-proliferation treaty commitment, which is to refrain from manufacturing nuclear weapons.
Could Tehran seek to use its nuclear program as leverage against the West as tensions increase in the region?
I can imagine them looking for ways of increasing concern and an anxiety in the West about their nuclear program, but stopping short of actually, shall we say, crossing the line and ceasing to be in compliance with the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty.
Meanwhile, Israel has repeatedly said it would not allow Iran to develop a nuclear weapon. Israel itself is widely believed to have atomic weapons, though it does not allow IAEA inspections of its nuclear sites. Henry Ridgewell, VOA News, London.
And now back to the topic of the day. Vice President Constantino Chiwenga today told civil servants who gathered at Africa Unity Square in Harare that Zimbabwe has lost more than US $120 billion since the imposition of sanctions 22 years ago.
Sanctions aripo endauraya mhuri yeZimbabwe. Dai patiri nhasi panapa tava nechinhano chiri pamusoro. Hosha yedu yekuti takatorerei ivhu redu kupa kune vanhu. Ndo pane nyaya hapana zvimwe. Imwe twese twakutaurwa kuti hatuna maturo. Nyika takapuwa nayo newedenga. Zviri pasi pevhu takapuwa newedenga. Saka izvozvo zvinhu izvozvo zvinofanira kushandiswa nevene veZimbabwe. Kwete kuti auyawo zvakabva kune imwe nyika woya wotora upfumi hwedu vonosimudzira nyika dzekwavo. Isu tiri kutakati kwete izvozvo ndo zvisingaitwe izvo. Zvadaro zvikanzi mazviitirei maakutaridza vapasi rese kuti kana uri mukuru kuti master haafanirwi kutorerwa chigaro naslave wake nemushandi wake ndokuita kwakazviita. Ndo zvatipinza paipapa. Asi isu takati aiwa, we now think outside the box. Saka sanctions or no sanctions Zimbabwe inobudirira. Endeko zvinezvi zvamakuziva mese kuti pane makore matatu hatina nzara muno, makore matatu tine wheat yedu yakazvikwanira, hakuna kwachinotenga. Maminerals edu atanga kusimuka. Ende takutanga kuvaka industry yedu, manufacturing sector yedu, zvese takuzviitira zvatifundisa ivo ngavagare variko. Shaona chatsvaga uyu.
Saka sezvo masanctions asiri pamutemo munogona kukumbira here kuti nyika idzo dziripe mari yatakarasikirwa nayo.
Iwe ingotarisa ungoona kuti zvikufamba ndozvipi. Vanhu veZimbabwe hatisi zvikututa. Ndatenda.
One of the protesters, Spiwe Murandu, castigated the sanctions and requested that they be removed. Murandu speaks with VOA reporter Godwin Mangujga.
Spiwe Murandu. Ndadiri pano nenyaya yemasanctions. Kusungirwa kwatakaitwa zvinhu muno muZimbabwe. Nezera yandave ndichingosafiswa nezvinhu zvakaitwa zvisina chirangano. Saka isusu tiri pano kukumbira kuti masanctions ngaabviswe. Nekuti nzvimbo nenzvimbo, ingangoti nyika nenyika ine vanhu vayo, nyika nenyika ine mutemo. Saka sesuwo seZimbabwe tiri kutaura kuti toda kusununguka tiri mukati menyika yedu yeZimbabwe. Tiri kukumbira kuti vekuma-Western countries vakatiisawo maningi masanction ngavatinzwisisewo, vabvise masanctions tiwane kusununguka, tichemberewo tiri munyasha dzaMwari, tiri pamwe chete nevamwe, nyika ichitifambira zvakanaka.
Semaonero enyu sei vana America vasiri kubvisa masanction?
Semaonero angu ini ndongoti vese kuAmerica vari kubvisa masanctions vanhu vane moyo wakaoma, vamwe vari kubvuta zvisiri zvavo, nekuda vachiziva kuti takapiwa zvipikirwa zvenyika zvokuti nyika nenyika ine chipikirwa chevanhu vayo vakanzi vanorarama varimo, havairwadzika neZimbabwe. Nekuti isusu veZimbabwe havambotoni china kuAmerica kuti toda kunotonga ikoko. Kana tichienda kutoenda kunokumbira nekuda kubatana nekuda kuyanana, kwete kurwadzisana.
That was Voice of America Studio 7 reporter Godwin Mangujga in Harare. In South Africa, ZANU-PF and other former liberation parties and organizations today gathered at the U.S. Embassy in Pretoria to protest over the targeted U.S. and EU sanctions imposed on Zimbabwe. The Southern African Development Community, or SADC, in 2019 designated the 25th of October as the Anti-Sanctions Day in solidarity with Zimbabwe in a move to protest punitive measures imposed against Zimbabwe by the United States and the EU. However, America and the EU say these sanctions are targeting only individuals and entities known for violating human rights and disregarding the rule of law in Zimbabwe. Zimbabwean President Emmerson Mnangagwa and his inner circles, including businessman Kudata Gwirei, are on the sanctions list. Please stay tuned as we take a brief break.
In times of change, when the world seems uncertain and what we hear doesn't reflect what we see, we seek the truth. When we are told only part of the story, we lose trust. In moments of crisis, our dreams, hopes, and wishes for a better tomorrow depends on a free press. At Voice of America, we bring you the stories that people take risks to see. We connect the world and unite it with truth. At Voice of America, we show you the whole picture.
For those that have just joined us, please note that we are streaming live on our Facebook pages, VOA Shona, VOA Studio 7, and VOA Ndebele. We are also live on YouTube, VOA Zimbabwe. Today we are discussing the SADC anti-sanctions march held across the country with thousands of civil servants marching in Harare, demonstrating against the sanctions the government says were imposed against Zimbabwe by the United States of America and other Western nations. But the US and the European Union argue that Zimbabwe as a country is not on sanctions. President Joe Biden's administration says it only targeted a few individuals and entities with travel restrictions and economic sanctions. The US remains the biggest funder of humanitarian aid to Zimbabwe and has spent more than $3.2 billion in the country in the area of health, food, and others. And to discuss this issue, we are joined by Citizens Coalition for Change North America member Tawanda Dzokora, who is in North Dakota here in the USA, MDCA North America chairperson Dan Moore in Virginia, and also here in the United States of America, and ZANU-PF Information Officer Francis Mufambi, who is in Harare. Welcome to our show, gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes, let me start by throwing this question to Mr. Mufambi. Mr. Mufambi. Yes. We witnessed the civil servants marching in Harare and other anti-sanctions events being held around the country and outside the country. What do the government and ZANU-PF seek to achieve from this?
Okay, good evening, listeners. I'm honored to be here today on this special occasion of the Anti-Sanctions Day. As we commemorate this day in Zimbabwe in the diaspora, it's important to reflect on the significance of this initiative. It's important to understand that the Anti-Sanctions Day serves as a platform to raise awareness about the negative effects of some of the legal sanctions, not only on the government but also on the ordinary Zimbabweans. So this one was just a call for solidarity and unity within the SADC region as we stand together and urge the Western countries to unconditionally lift the legal sanctions. Sanctions has had a profound economic implication on Zimbabwe, as we all know, hindering our development, impeding foreign direct investment and affecting the lives of the most vulnerable populations, especially the poor. They hindered our nation's progress and they limited the opportunities and for growth and prosperity of Zimbabwe. So as you know, Zimbabwe is under 3 points of sanctions, which is the BERA, which is OFAC, which is AGOA. And they charged by the African Development Bank in 2013, then showed that we had lost nearly $42 billion. But one can only imagine what the country has lost in a further 10 years. And the estimates are saying the loss is now $120 billion. So on the illegality of these sanctions, it is common cause that they violate international law and other parental norms, such as the United Nations Charter, such as the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, such as the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, such as the World Trade Organization protocol. And all this has been confirmed by a report by the UN Special Rapporteur, Mrs. Elena Duan, who clearly highlighted how these sanctions increase the rights.
Mr. Mfambi?
And the economic and social rights by all.
Mfambi, ngoti di mutipinze muteereri taura yenyu.
I can go ahead.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so we use this as an occasion in the platform to advocate for the unconditional removal of the embargo, to amplify our voices and to chart a path towards the more prosperous and inclusive Zimbabwe for all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Please do stay on the line. We have our first caller. Hello?
Salona ninjani.
Linjani baba. Makadi mfundisi moyo ndazwa izwiro.
Zakanaka makundiziva be.
Ya kulumani baba.
Aiwa tinotendera ngeni kwase baba vakandimire nedare navadzokora neve vose vamino padare nevatari nevatiri vese studio 7. Regai nditaurawo zvishoma nhau yezirango yaiva mukati menyika yedu yeZimbabwe nhasi. Chimwe chinhu chinondishamisa ndechekuti tinoona vamwe vachirambidzwa kumacha kuratidzira, asi nhasi notaona vamwe vose vabuda nevashandi vakasiyana vachiratidza kududzira kuti kumwe kuratidzira kune kusarurana. But zvisinei zvazvo nhau yezirango yese kutaura kwavari kuita kuchema kwemakorosa kugara vachema vari kunyika yose, noti kana kutarisa vanhu ivavo vakatemerwa zvirango zvacho vari kuchema kuti zvirango ndo zvinotikanganisa, hatisi kutonga chichi. Asi ini maonero andiri kuita ndinoona sokuti kutokundikana kudhiraivha nyika, kudokundikana kutungamirira nyika mamirira zvakaita saizvozvo, nokuti akungochema. Asi seshuviro yangu samufundisi dai zvaikwanisika kuti vaimbozvibvisa tione kuti zvinofamba sei izinto zifana lezo, ngenxa yekuti the way vakhala ngakhona vayakhala kakhulu ngatana mava zikhipha sibone ukuhamba njani. Even masibona ndiyabona vayalila laphaya, mara mina angeke ngibone ukuthi ama-sanction ngiwo ayenza ukuthi ilizwe lingakhambi kuhle. Masibona izimali ziyakhithwa izinto ndinakutenda. Sorry okay ndinotenda. Ngingakhuluma kokugcina.
Taura itinzwe dimurai.
Okay, no, ngithanda ukukhuluma kokugcina kunabalaleli bonke beZimbabwe. Sesibawa nisincede ngamavoti amancane kunomungane wethu omkhulu, nisivotele ku 107 Statima 18 ku 4949 5. Ngiyathokoza kakhulu totenda zvikuru makanaka baba vakandimira.
Maita basa mfundisi. Thank you so much. That was our first caller, Mufundisi Richard Moyo, calling from South Africa. Let me go to Mr. Dzokora. Mr. Dzokora, you heard what Mr. Mufambi said and also what our first caller said. Do you agree? Mr. Dzokora? Mr. Dzokora, are you there?
I can hear you, and I have not missed you, Moyo.
Okay, let me go to Mr. Moyo before we go back to Mr. Dzokora. Mr. Moyo, we saw the marches, but from what we gathered, the marchers didn't go to the USA embassy or the British or European Union embassies to demonstrate there or hand over petitions. What do you say about this?
Yeah, first and foremost, I want to say it is their right to demonstrate. And as we have always said, that right is not a privilege to just ZANU-PF and its members. It should be a privilege for all Zimbabweans as stipulated in our constitution. So it really smacks discrimination when we see ZANU-PF allowing themselves to demonstrate, and yet when other people want to demonstrate government failures, they are denied to do so. The fact that this demonstration didn't go to the American embassy is really mind-boggling, because if the idea is to send a message to the Americans about the sanctions, then the issue should have been taken to the United States Embassy in Harare so that they could hand over a petition. I think the reason they did not go to the U.S. Embassy is simple because they know that they have failed to adhere to the conditions that have been set by the U.S. government to lift the sanctions. In other words, I have always said that ZANU-PF, in my opinion, is the biggest supporter of these sanctions because it allows them to loot the resources of the country without any scrutiny. If these sanctions were to be, and then they use these sanctions as a red herring to create an impression that the failures of their government is due to these sanctions. When these sanctions, it is clear from the U.S. government that these sanctions are targeted at individuals who are supporting the draconian ZANU-PF regime.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. Let me go back to Mr. Jokora. I think he's ready now. Mr. Jokora, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, you heard what Mr. Mufambi and what Mr. Moyo said. So people are eagerly waiting for your response to these two gentlemen's statements.
Aiwa, ko ZANU-PF aimbofa yakaregedza kunyadzisa, iri kuzvinyadzisa zvairi kuita izvi. Vana veZimbabwe vari kuzviziva, chero chembere dziri kumaruzevha dzinozviziva kuti masanctions haasiriwo aita kuti nyika yedu isvike payasvika. It's a very poorly stage-managed propaganda that ZANU-PF is trying to use. And I can tell you nobody is buying it. We all know that the sanctions that are there are targeted towards certain individuals. They are targeted towards ZANU-PF people. They don't affect the ordinary person. So this is just going to fail, just like all the other demonstrations I have done in the past years. It's ZANU-PF trying to enhance itself, but it's not managing. There are no sanctions that are affecting the country. ZANU-PF is the biggest sanction that we have.
Thank you so much, Radzokora. Let me go back to Mr. Mufambi. Mr. Mufambi, we heard that the marchers did not go to the American embassy, neither the British or EU embassies. Why, if you are fighting against these sanctions, what you term them, call illegal sanctions? Oh, I think we have lost Mr. Mufambi. Mufambi. Let's try to bring him back to the show. Let me go to Mr. Denmoyo. Mr. Denmoyo, these sanctions have been there for 22 years, and the government has been marching since 2019, when Sadiq said that it was in solidarity with the Zimbabwe government and came up with this anti-sanctions day. Do you see any changes or any movements?
No, I don't see any, and I don't see why the United States, Britain, and all these other countries that imposed these targeted sanctions have to do anything, because the ball really is in ZANU-PF's court. The ZIDERA, which is the name for these sanctions, is very clear what needs to be done. And they have said that it will be on a quid pro quo, meaning that you do one good thing that is on that list, then they will also reciprocate and remove some of the sanctions or remove some of the targeted people. But because, as I've always argued, that ZANU-PF does not want these sanctions removed, because if they remove these sanctions, then they will be exposed in their looting. So they would rather have these sanctions continue, so that they continue to lie to the Zimbabwean people that the country is failing because of these sanctions.
Vadzokora, tinonzwa kuti zvirango izvi zvakatemerwa vanhuwo zvavo vanonzi vakanangwa nezvirango patinenge tichiti targeted sanctions, asi tichinzwa vari muZimbabwe vari kuti hongu kandai makati zvakanongedzani kana zvakanongedza nyika kana makambani api, pakupedzisira zviri kungoruma mwana weZimbabwe, nekudaro zvinofanira kubviswa. Sei vasiri kuwanawo kana kuti pasiri kuwanawo vanokurudzirawo America kuti aiwa mbobvisai zvirango izvi tione kuti chii chinoitika, nokuti vanhu vari kuhwanda nezvirango avo? Mr. Dzokora, are you there? I think we are having problems with our connections. He is there, but Mr. Dzokora, okay, while we are trying to have a good connection with Mr. Dzokora, let me go back to Mr. Den Moyo. Mr. Moyo, I was just asking Mr. Dzokora, if these sanctions are targeted as what the American government and other Western nations say, and well, on the other side, the government of Zimbabwe is saying, no, they are hating everyone. Why can't those who impose the sanctions just remove them and see if things may change in Zimbabwe?
Well, the whole idea behind the sanctions is to force a certain change within the Zimbabwe government. And America thinks that these punitive sanctions on these individuals will somehow influence change in their behavior, in the way that they are handling the Zimbabwean situation in terms of the politics, the reforms that are required for the electoral reforms. I have suggested myself to the Zimbabwean government that one of the things they can show that they are serious about bringing the change that is required is, for instance, the diaspora vote. What is so difficult with allowing the Zimbabweans in the diaspora to vote, to have say and vote?
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor. Let me go to Mr. Dzokora before we end the show. Mr. Dzokora.
Yes, sir.
Okay, you can hear me now. Yes. I was talking about the governments that impose sanctions on Zimbabwe, just removing those sanctions and see what happens. But at the same time, you as Zimbabweans in the diaspora, and also your party being one of the, the major or the main opposition party in the country, what are you also doing to make sure that these sanctions are removed and see what happens? Mr. Dzokora.
If there are any sanctions, nobody supports sanctions. But what we know is that the sanctions that are there are individually targeted. They are targeting certain individuals in ZANU-PF, and that doesn't affect the national economy of our country. And what we also know is that there are
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dzokora. That brings us to the end of our show. We would like to thank all our guests and, of course, you, the viewers and listeners at home. Be sure to tune in tomorrow. I'm Jonga Kandemiri in Washington, D.C., saying goodbye.